Welcome to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr on Iowa Catholic Radio. Every Wednesday, diving deep in the truth of the Catholic Church and restoring all things in Christ. The Uncommon Good, live from the Mercy Live Up studio.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
Dr. Budinsky is in the house.
Oh! We should just start howling for a straight minute. That can be our call. That can be our thing, bud.
I've got enough coffee in me this morning to howl. So let me know when you need that to happen.
Well, we are coming to you live, Iowa Catholic Radio's Mercy Live Up studio, and through the magic of robots, Bud is coming to us from the future in Pittsburgh. So, other than coffee, how are you doing today, Bud?
Oh, doing pretty well. Last night I had the pleasure to lecture at St. Vincent's Seminary here in Pennsylvania on Newman's Grammar of Ascent.
Ooh.
So it turned into, it's kind of like an hour north of our place, so kind of a late night. But I don't know. The Huskers won last night in basketball.
Yeah.
I'm going on little sleep, but lots of coffee, so I'll be okay.
Life is good, huh? Well, it's good to know that things are finally turning up roses for you. We know how benighted and sad your life has been. So I'm glad that God's throwing you a bone, bud.
God's putting French fries on my salad.
Have you been a part of this next wave of winter, or have you guys, is it like sunny Mediterranean Pittsburgh at the moment?
Yeah, crazy enough, Saturday night it snowed a few inches, and we were kind of concerned about making it to church, but by morning time, the streets were clear, and then yesterday it got up to 75, and when I left the house, my two oldest daughters were arguing with Rachel about, like, breaking out the summer bin of clothes.
75? So, wow.
Yeah, it was nutso.
We have not hit that in Iowa. We are, I don't know if you heard the weather report, we are supposed to be at wind chills of 0 all day, so nice and how you expect it. You know what, Bud, when it's 0 degrees, or that's how it feels outside, you know what's a fun thing to do? Printing. And you know where you can get supplies to do that? Tell me, Bud.
World.
Cartridge World. That's right.
Yeah.
Cartridge World, our show always underwritten by Cartridge World. Over in Windsor Heights, they have all of your printing needs, and they can do that in an environmental way. That's going to come up with the theme of our show. And like we've always talked about, Joe, the big KU fan, has to be a lot happier, like you, Nebraska, him, KU. Not so much us Iowa State, Oklahoma State fans, not doing as well lately.
No, but you're right. I think printing and ink cartridges and things, that's something you don't want to mess with. You want to know that you've got like what you need, the stability, and Cartridge World provides that. So
that's one of those memes where it's
resource.
like things you didn't think you would care about when you were an adult. You know, when you're a kid, you were going to worry about quicksand, and when you're an adult, you're like, what about ink cartridges? So
have some picture of someone with like ink squirting out of the machine like all over them.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Also, as always, written by Mercy College of Health Sciences. We're going to keep pumping up that we have our final Faith and Healing series coming up in April 5th, because we just got down with a very successful one. Bishop Pates, like I told everyone, he kind of started his farewell tour with us, Bud. The news coming across the desk all through Des Moines, of course, is that Bishop Pates turned 75 and turned in his official resignation. That's what every bishop has to do. But if you were at Mercy College at our Faith and Healing series, you got to really hear him sort of put a nice cherry on top of the sundae, which is his ecclesial life.
No, I saw that announcement this week. I was kind of wondering if that was coming down the pike, so that's pretty awesome that you guys got the swan song.
That's right. Now, if we need to, like, if only we had the foresight to make like T-shirts, like the farewell tour.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. You know, sometimes bishops, Rome moves kind of drags its feet, so they can stick around for a while. And I know, you guys in Des Moines would love that with Bishop Pates.
Yeah, well, I think he's to make another connection to the show today. So I think he's thinking about going back and playing golf in the Twin Cities and watching the Vikings break their hearts and stuff like that. Speaking of the Twin Cities, we have a guest from the Twin Cities, if I'm not mistaken. Who's on the show today, Bud?
So today we have Dr. Chris Thompson. He teaches at St. Thomas, and he's written a great deal on what's called green Thomism, which is a catchphrase for drawing on the riches of the Catholic faith, specifically the writings and thought of St. Thomas, to think about our relationship to the created world. In Laudato Si, the encyclical by Pope Francis, he talks about an integral ecology, and I think there's a lot of important ideas there, but it's one of those things that some Catholics may hear the phrase integral ecology and think like, does that mean I plant tulips in my backyard? So we're going to try to put meat on those bones this morning.
Right. It's not all kombucha and kale. Actually, a lot of the writings that, if you go onto the website, and they have greenthomism.wordpress.com, I think, a lot of them appear in like Catholic rural life conferences, speaking specifically about farming. So green Thomism is not, so to speak, like a concern just for people speaking in the university. This is something that I think Iowans, I don't think you're out on your tractors today, corn farmers, but if you're raring to go and you don't have anything to do, this is precisely the show for you.
Yeah, I know, Chris, a lot of his work and outreach is with rural Catholics. And, in Iowa, we've always had like a strong sense of the kind of like special nature of being, like being in a rural parish. There's all sorts of things that come with it. But it sounds like a lot of the great conversations he's having is with Catholics who farm or have that closeness to the land. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Yep, you're from Nebraska, although you're from the hood of Nebraska. But we'll forgive you for being in the dangerous parts of Omaha. I grew up in Oklahoma, partly in Kansas. Have a Kansas wife. We're in Iowa here. This is something really regionally that I think we all can really listen to and benefit from. So, folks, I think it's going to be a great show. Stick around. We'll be back in a few. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you on this frosty, nippy day that we have. Bud, it's funny that when it's all white and covered with ice outside, the grass is dead. But I actually think that winter is the perfect time to talk about green Thomism, because as nature sleeps and prepares for her, soon-to-be reawakening, I've been reading the Canterbury Tales, if you can't tell, that it's a good time to talk about these things. So, Bud, if you don't mind introducing our guest.
Yeah, our guest this morning is Dr. Christopher Thompson. He's the Associate Professor of Moral Theology and Director of the Center for Theological Formation at St. Thomas in Minneapolis. He's also the author of The Joyful Mystery, Field Notes Toward a Green Thomism, published by Emmaus Road. Dr. Thompson, thanks for being with us this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I noticed that you did your bachelor's degree at Creighton. Omaha is a pretty great city, right?
It's an awesome city. It's fantastic. Yeah, I did my undergrad bachelor's degree, and my wife is an Omahan.
Oh, awesome. I knew he had a good guess. I grew up about 6 miles north of Creighton, a great love for Omaha.
This is more central Omaha, Westo, and that sort of thing. It's a delightful town. I've been going to it we've been married 30 years now, so I've been making a lot of treks across Iowa, I might add. I'm very familiar with Iowa, at least the stretch along 35 and 80. And pass through Des Moines at least 3 times a year.
Well, there you go. And I'm sure that you're laughing at us complaining about how cold it is in Iowa, like up in Minnesota.
Yeah. This is God's country, and you can really get your faith tested on these kinds of days. That's for sure.
Well, so I actually went. I'm an Okie originally. I went to Oklahoma State and got a philosophy degree because I like doing things that don't make sense. I remember my granddad. He actually got a PhD and was an agronomist, so he was a weed inspector. And he was trying to get me to do both, and I am so mad at myself to not have a double degree in philosophy and agriculture. In the 90s, in 1999 at the time, everyone acted like that sounded silly. But I really think I would have been ahead of the game. So when people think that philosophy or theology doesn't have anything to do with the farms and the fields, what's the first response you have to him about why this is so important to think about these two things together?
Well, I do feel like you've missed your opportunity, huh? That's like passing on Apple stock or deciding that televisions aren't going to be that relevant, that sort of thing. Yeah, to be a philosopher and a weed specialist these days, I think would be an ideal combination, especially for a Catholic intellectual community, because we need to overcome this divide that's crept into our imagination between our faith and our care of the land, to take as a general topic, not just weeds, but plants and care of the earth and sustainability. These are all vital questions that the culture is asking, And let's face it, our Catholic faith has something to contribute. We have the grace of revelation. We have the Holy Spirit in our corner. Let's bring these gifts to the community to help us figure out what we ought to do. But we've got a problem on both sides of the conversation where each side is just really not interacting or in conversation. So my project for the last 10 years or so, all things green Thomism, has been to build bridges between those two conversations, between our Catholic faith and care for the environment, with a special focus on agriculture.
Yeah, you talk about, Dr. Thompson, in one of your articles that I found, you say that your aim is to bring these two groups of people together. Right. What do you think, what are some of the reasons why this divorce has crept up? Because one thread that I see through your writings is like this kind of green Thomism, this ecological concern has been an important part of Catholic thought, and yet today it might be overlooked sometimes or sort of lost in the shuffle.
Right. It's a couple of factors, and being an academic, rest assured I can go on for days here, but I'll try to keep it simple. But a couple of factors would be on the ecological side. That conversation has largely been dominated by secular scientists, and so Catholics maybe instinctively have a sense of non-engagement because of the secular nature of the conversation. That's been true. But even on the Catholic side, I think there's been a sort of drift to distancing ourselves from the natural order, almost a sense of because I'm a faithful Catholic or because I'm a conservative Catholic, for lack of a better term, I don't take ecological concerns seriously. That's what liberals do, and that's just been an unfortunate consequence in our conversation across the board. Let me just say a couple things here. For example, of the 244 Catholic universities in the United States, not a single one offers a program of study in agriculture. Not one. Now, when I'm driving across Iowa, I'm getting a whole lot of agriculture.
Right.
When you're seeing corn and beans and farms as far as the eye can see, mile after mile after mile, at one level you think this is an extraordinary cultural achievement. But at another level, you think, how can it be that the men and women, the thousands of men and women committed to this enterprise, have no intersection in their formation with the Catholic intellectual tradition? What's going on that I can be a lawyer, a doctor, a dentist, an accountant, an engineer, a beautician, a poet, a philosopher, and I can find a Catholic university to go and study? But if I want to raise hogs or cattle or dairy or soybeans or corn, manage estates and lands that might be older than the university itself, there's nothing for me. That's where I started to say something had gone wrong. Something's gone wrong. We've allowed lower creation to slip through our imagination, and it has all kinds of consequences in our Catholic culture. Not only does it allow the ecological questions then to just sort of go on without any particular Catholic engagement, but even our own Catholic faith starts to take on, frankly, a kind of anemia, a certain lack of nutrition, because you and I are not in contact with the earth. We're not in contact with the created order and its rhythms. We start to live the Catholic faith simply between our ears. And I think in the long run, that compromises our ability to live an integral life of holiness.
Wow, this has been, I don't know you very well, but you're already one of my favorite people just for that last line of talk. I think about it in a few ways. One is people can get fruit whenever they want. They don't understand seasons anymore. I mean, so that's part of it. Two, they don't understand a holy fear of grasshoppers. And I know this sounds weird, but up through the 80s, I can still remember in Oklahoma, because of my granddad, being really worried about what grasshoppers were up to, because I don't think anybody remembers the last time grasshoppers took out a crop, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And then, you know, the final thing is when you talk about, you know, agriculture, they forget that second part, culture, right? Like culture, we talk about Catholic culture all the time, but we forget that culture takes its roots, hardy har har, from cultivating land. And people will drive out into fields, and I think they see, like, the outdoors or wilderness almost, but actually any ancient and medieval person would go along a road and see, a cultivated field, and they would see civilization. Like, that's a civilizational achievement, but we act like a field is the outdoors, and just those three things seem to be part of why we're so disoriented.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of wisdom there, lots of things to think about. Let's just take one topic about culture and agriculture. This is why I think Francis wanted to raise the issue of integral ecology. And to me, the way I get at integral ecology is just reflecting on agricultural life here in the United States. At one level, it has been the dream of a millennia to get the kind of yields and produce that we're getting in our fields. In other words, you drive across Iowa and you look out into that field, it's an extraordinary human achievement to get that corn to be so uniform as far as the eye can see.
200 plus bushel. It's insane. I from Oklahoma, I hear northern Iowa farmers, and I'm frankly still jealous about all of it, and I don't even have a farm.
It's an extraordinary achievement, and the amount of energy and time and research and labor that goes into accomplishing that, I think you're right, is an incredible achievement of human culture for which we have to be proud. But the other part of this is you have to ask, what's happening then to these communities that are supporting this? Well, now you get a different story. You get a different story of depleted resources, of children not coming back to the farm, of medical care not quite being up to snuff, of educational resources. You drive in the middle of some of these towns. You get off the interstate and you take 21 or something, and you get into the smaller towns. You really see distressed communities. And so that, to me, is how I get at the question of integral ecology. How can it be that land prices are $10,000 an acre?
Amen.
That you've got essentially a community of millionaires living in a community that no one particularly wants to be in. Mm. So what's going on, and how does it happen that at the one level, from the perspective of production and yield and technology and outcome and efficiency, it's this extraordinary achievement. But from the perspective of family, community, heritage, education, religious formation, vocations, it's a rather different story. And I think part of the task of integral ecology is to raise that question. How do we prepare people to think a little bit more deeply as to what's going on?
Dr. Thompson, with some of the realities that you described right there, do you think we've felt the full effects of that yet? Like this move to less and less like families farming the land and larger agribusiness. It sounds like there's this slow emptying out of that part of the country, but it might be some while before we realize the full implications of what's going on there.
Yeah, it's hard to say. The trend certainly points to larger and larger agriculture, but already, young people are resilient and they're creative, and you start to see pushback. You start to see young people interested in more sustainable ag practices, et cetera. Mm. And that's where I want to bring it back to our Catholic faith. When you and I are, most of us aren't on farms, and fewer of us in the country are on farms. So most of us are encountering agriculture and the use of created goods through the supermarket, through our purchases.
Yep.
And that's where I think we have to enter into a similar examination of conscience. I guess I like to say we can't be complaining about farmers as to how they treat their land or raise their animals, and then at the same time expect cheap food on demand all the time. In other words, a lot of the farm practice is the fact that it's driven by the markets, and that means you and I, people who purchase these things. So we have to be more thoughtful in our practices. And Lent, it seems to me, is a perfect time to make an examination of my habits of consumption. Do I run and buy the cheapest and the biggest box of whatever it is I'm going to serve my family? Or do I take a little bit more time and maybe even take a little bit more money and be a little bit more selective in my purchases about how the food is raised, where it comes from, where's the community that's growing this food? Is it local, or is it the middle of, on the other side of the earth? These are all the habits and practices of temperance, the virtue of temperance, mm-hmm. that we would weave into our Catholic faith. So now you start to see boy, living a Catholic faith and being attentive to what's going on in agriculture, in fact, are pretty intimate. But for some reason, we sort of talked ourselves out of it and have forgotten to make that connection.
I think part of that starts to be too, and I know people. I don't know. I go back and forth deciding that if there's someone who nefariously thinks this out and makes it this way, or if it's just a trap that humans usually build for themselves. There's a lot of gatekeeping when it comes to agriculture, which is hilarious because it used to be just a human thing to do, right?
Right.
Go pick berries, go plant something.
Right.
But like you said, I mean, I don't even want to think about how much it costs to even rent combines, let alone own one now.
Right.
You know, and you pointed out about land. I mean, there is land, like I said, in Oklahoma, which used to, they gave away because it was so bad, that's just out of, that no 20-something could ever imagine coming together and buying.
Right.
And then
the barriers to entry are formidable.
And barriers to entry into even, buying, like you're saying, right? There's families that they really do have to buy the terrible food. And do we ever put those barriers on the table to talk about those?
Well, that's I think that's part of a sort of new Catholic consciousness and the rise of ecological awareness that the next generation, like yourselves, I think are more open to discussing, and I think it's a great opportunity for evangelization to bring our Catholic faith into more concrete reality and how we live our lives. I'm in the university setting, so I have to own my own contributions to this deformation. And I mentioned the fact that we don't have any programs in agriculture in Catholic universities. And so you have to ask what's going on intellectually that allowed that fundamental human endeavor to fall through the cracks. And there I think it's just a lack of interest in created nature and its significance for the spiritual life. And that's a consequence that we are going to have to correct. Maybe one other little fact I just share with you to sort of put things in context. I was reading the other day about the Oxford Junior Dictionary. This is produced by Oxford University Press, and it's dictionary for young people. And someone has noted the fact that the new edition of the dictionary has deleted a few entries in order to make room for newer entries. And the deletions include acorn, adder, bluebell, swan, dandelion, fern, hazel, heather, heron, owl, kingfisher, lark, mistletoe, nectar, newt, otter, pasture, and willow. Those are the words that have been deleted from the latest edition in order to make room for the following: blockgraph, blog, broadband, bullet point, celebrity, chat room, committee, cut and paste, MP3 player, and voicemail. Well, that to me is a signal of what's happening in the next generation. The words that sort of describe most of our natural surrounding drop from the dictionary, and then the words that sort of introduce us to this great technological world are inserted. It's not a malice. It's not suggesting a plot or a conspiracy, but you start to see that the whole culture together starts to forget our contact with the natural order. I just want to say that's where Thomas, it seems to me, can help us to recover an engagement with the natural order and its capacity to tell us something about God.
Well, I just got done saying that you were one of my favorite people, but after that depressing last minute, I'm gonna throw it all into question. Okay, as an example of what you're talking about, so I read an article about dandelion tea, and I was like, oh yeah, like people used to do this all the time. I should go make some. And then I read the last paragraph, is which, by the way, if you live in town, do not use dandelion tea. It is inevitably undrinkable and unedible because of all the chemicals in your ground. And to me, that is, you want to talk about the barriers and like the shifts. That is like this sterling image of, even if you wanted to go make dandelion tea, which used to be like any poor person could do that. Now you can't even do it because we're worried about what's in the dandelion.
You do have to be careful, that's for sure. You don't want to be going back into your suburban lawn and start making tea of your grass clippings. You'll get sick for sure. Might not be very tasty tea, frankly, anyway. I don't know.
Yeah, that's right.
But I do remember once when I took a group of students out into a tour of Southwest Minnesota farms, just to get to your point. And one of the things I think that everyone was caught off guard was when you went into the kitchen, there were two taps on the sink. One was the water that was coming out of the ground, and the other was the water you could drink. That there are two taps in every kitchen in this New Ulm diocese, because people can't drink the water out of the soil. That's a problem, and we've got to ask ourselves, how in the world do we get ourselves to this situation? And frankly, what are the resources that are going to rally us as a people committed to the common good? What are the resources that are going to strengthen us to address these problems? Here I would just allude to St. Thomas, and part of my project is to bring his thought back into the conversation to help us think these things through. He had a confidence in God's creation. He had a confidence in the human person's ability to discern God's wisdom in creation. This is one of the fundamental building blocks in his philosophy and his theology, and I think it's something we have to get back to.
Well, we're coming up on the half-hour break. When we get back with you, let's dive into that. Thomas Aquinas and what he can do to help us understand and move forward with some of these issues. It's been a fascinating talk so far, folks. You really want to stick around. We'll talk about St. Thomas, what he has to tell us about conservation and the environment. Stick around. This is The Uncommon Good. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr. Bud, reintroduce the guest for everyone. We're having a great time, and I think we have a lot more to say in the second half hour.
Yeah, on this morning's show, we're speaking with Dr. Christopher Thompson, who teaches moral theology at the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota. He's written a book on green Thomism, and that's our conversation this morning. Dr. Thompson, thanks for being back with us.
It's a pleasure.
So, yeah, this half hour we'd like to get into the thought of St. Thomas, but I was going to spring one on you before we jumped into that. You know,
sure,
when I went to div school, I had an Old Testament prof who pointed out to us, and I was just kind of shocked that I missed this point growing up reading Scripture. But in the Old Testament and in that entire narrative, the people's attachment to the land is a really big deal, and it seems like that insofar as they move away from God and God's will, that the impact of that sin actually bears directly upon the land. So this whole conversation is not only rooted in the great Catholic thinkers, but very much in sacred Scripture. Have you touched on any of that in some of your own writings or conversations?
Just in passing, let me say I think your instinct and your insight is spot on. In the Old Testament, covenant and land are intimately connected. It's part of the covenantal promise that Israel is going to be granted land. And the care of the land is part of their responsibility and relationship to God. And it also becomes a teaching instrument. God sometimes will devastate the land in order to bring Israel back to its senses. And prophets will call on Israel to revisit their treatment of land, especially their sharing of goods with the poor, in order to bring Israel back to the covenant. So you're absolutely right that in the Old Testament, for sure, there's an intimacy between fidelity to God and fidelity to the land. By the time the New Testament comes along, Christians distance themselves at least slightly from any particular land ethic, but we read the whole Scriptures, not just the New Testament. And so I think you're right to say in the Old Testament there's a kind of land ethic and an ecology that's well worth praying about and meditating on. I think you're spot on.
Well, I think that goes right into what you wanted to talk about with St. Thomas. You know, in Christianity, of course, it's a very long... we've been together for a long time talking about these things. How do we say that? And, of course, for every impulse that has a tinge of Gnosticism, right, that we're more spiritual and that we want to leave the earth, we always correct that. And Thomas Aquinas in the Middle Ages was a wonderful correction to this, so much so that one of my favorite authors, Dennis Turner, in his book on Thomas, it's chapter 2, goes to the extent of saying, compared to everyone else at his time, Thomas Aquinas was a materialist. Now, he's saying this to be kind of provocative, but his point is to say, for Thomas, we don't have bodies, we are our bodies. Our soul and body are, hylomorphic unity is the technical term, but so much so that to ignore our bodies or creation or our place in creation is to do a disservice to what God has called us to do.
I think that's fantastic, and you're spot on as far as I'm concerned. For Thomas, one of his great sort of first principles in his approach was to defend the goodness of creation, the fact that God wills each of these creatures into being. And when God creates ex nihilo, he doesn't just create a random pile of Lego blocks. He doesn't create a spill out a pile of Scrabble tiles. He creates an ordered cosmos where each creature has its own intelligibility and finality and purpose, and it has this symphonic quality to the universe as a whole that displays this divine wisdom. This is inherent in each of the creatures. And of course, he's in opposition, as you were mentioning. He's pushing against Albigensian heresy, which was about the wickedness of the created order, etc. But the Catholic, and especially the Catholic steeped in the thought of St. Thomas, when we walk out into the created order, we see an incredible gift from God. We see a divine jeweler's shop at work. We see this incredible art museum of all these divine artifacts. And it's one of these first postures I think the Christian has to practice, the Catholic has to practice. It's very popular to talk about what is learning. Take the example of education. Well, education is me holding a candle, and I'm walking out into the dark universe, and I've got the candle in my hand, and I'm discovering things as I move. For St. Thomas, it's exactly the opposite. Things are thick with light. Creatures are brimming with intelligibility. I'm the one that's in the dark. When you and I walk out, we're not walking out into a universe that's devoid of meaning. We're not walking out into this abyss of nothingness. We're walking out into this wonderful world charged by the glory of God that flames out, as Hopkins says, like shining from shook foil. All of these creatures, this incredible museum of art brimming with intelligence. That's how the Catholic steps out into the world. And so the native habitat of the human person is precisely this cosmos of created beings where I discover the glory of God through my encounter with things. Now you can imagine how that's going to shape our attitude towards agriculture. When the farmer walks out into the field, he's walking out into a universe that's already ordered, already intelligible. And so the medievals would talk about farming as an ars cooperativa. It was a cooperative art because the farmer learned to work with the rhythms of nature itself. And instead of going into a field and beating a field into submission to say only one thing and one thing only, time after time after time, the wise farmer starts to discern, well, what does nature want to produce in the circumstances I find myself in? What are the movements and intelligibility available to me in the field that I have? And how do I work with the design and the purpose of the habitat that I find myself in? A good farmer knows how to do that. And of course, you can see I'm sort of raising some challenges and criticisms that tend to treat the soil or even the animal as a kind of blank slate upon which we can impress whatever I want for my own efficiency. I think that's a habit of being that's not consistent, frankly, with our Catholic faith.
I got really excited there as you were talking as an educator, just the possibilities there in terms of forming students. You know, there's an author, Matthew Crawford, who's written about shop class as soulcraft, and this idea that our students are not brains sitting in a classroom waiting to be filled with knowledge. And there's something really to be said about getting them into contact with the world because they find that there's a world beyond their head and that the world is not infinitely malleable, but we, part of living faithfully is learning the rhythms of life and living with the world well rather than trying to shape it to our own purposes. How has your embrace of integral ecology impacted even the way you teach?
Well, I think it's a great point. And if I had, if I were president, every student would have to raise something, would have a garden, would have something in contact with other living organic beings, because you start to realize I'm part of a broader whole here. In other words, I learned very quickly when I bought a piece of land that I wanted to convert into a native prairie that this is a very large piece of land, and I have to get in rhythm with its rhythms and its season. I have to get in tune with it. There's no way I'm going to go out there and be able to just control this fact or this fact. I have to get into rhythm with the animals and the land itself. Every good farmer knows this. Every successful farmer knows this. You have to work with the rhythms of the animals as given. You have to work with the circumstances of the land as given. Otherwise, you're going to run out of money simply by so many inputs and so much energy trying to make something else happen.
So
there's a certain modesty, in other words. There's a certain humility, I think.
Yeah.
A certain re-enchantment of the natural order that it would be useful for us to retrieve.
Well, so this is something that I just came to listening to you. So this is breaking radio, folks. It's quite a doozy, but I'm going to throw this out to you because you've been so fantastic so far. Okay. So integral ecology, we've been talking a lot about the ecology. The first word, integral, so integralism is a word that some people are not, they're a little shaky talking about. But I think about this, why do Catholics in the United States think that agriculture is not the purview of the Catholic Church? Well, they think it's the purview of state colleges, right? Because we think we have this very radical understanding of the separation of church and state. And funny enough, we have given over care of the land to the state, because there is no land in the United States was not given to someone without state authority first. I mean, like Nebraska was founded this way, Oklahoma, we can go on down the line. But when it comes down to this idea of integral, we have to get back to realizing that even no matter what governmental structure that a Catholic lives in, we can't cede part of creation over to the care of someone else. We have to think that it is an integral part of our stewardship. But I think that might be why a lot of Americans never think it crosses their mind that care for land would be a theological concern, because it's the care of state colleges and the government.
Yeah, right. That's the government's job. I think you're absolutely right. I really like your point that we can't cede over to the secular government the care of the land. That's not consistent with our theology of creation. Of course, that means we have to then step up and be engaged and informed on what are sound agricultural practices, what are the challenges farmers are facing, how do we realistically develop alternative markets, how do we support concretely small family farms. We can't just, it's tempting to just say, well, yes, it's messed up because of the government, and then just let it go. So I think the first half, that yes, we can't cede these things over to the government, has to be followed by the second half. Well, if not them, then it's got to be us.
Amen.
And what, in fact, does that mean? Well, interesting fact that I just wanted to share, sort of talking about a little bit of history in the United States. In fact, few people, I think, are aware that in the 30s and the 40s, there was a robust engagement of Catholics in agriculture. There's an organization called Catholic Rural Life. It's 90 years old. It has nowhere near the sort of status that it did in the 30s and the 40s. World War II came along, and all agriculture became about production, and so some of those conversations just fell by the wayside. But my point is to say, in 1941, for example, when Catholic Rural Life held its annual convention in Bismarck, North Dakota, 15,000 people came.
Oh.
Yeah. And they offered courses in rural agronomy. They had sociologists, they had agronomists, they had philosophers, they had environmentalists, all discussing the quality of life in rural America and raising some of these very questions. All of this was going on up and through the 1950s, and it more or less has disappeared. They had priests and religious attending rural seminars. training them in rural seminars. You had people advocating for small, local, organic food. You had farmers markets being promoted. An incredible engagement. In other words, all the questions that people are raising right now, Catholic community was on top of it in the 30s and 40s. There's a narrative that has largely fallen through the cracks, and hopefully maybe your readers can, pick up that story, and young people can start to explore and get hope in terms of how this is possible.
Well, by way of confession, if I was forced to survive off the land, I might be in trouble with my basic skill set. But I think that's true of most of us. Yeah.
Yes.
Reading your work, I get the sense, though, that regardless of where you fall in that spectrum, that, for instance, like, theologians have an important role to play. The philosopher Charles Taylor uses the phrase social imaginary, and the way we kind of imagine or conceive the world impacts so much how we relate to it. And you talk about how, for 2 millennia, the earth was seen as like this vast terra incognita, like a limitless resource with open lands or whatnot. And our sense of that has changed. But I think there's resources in the liturgy in different ways. I think about something like the Ember Days of Fasting that were incorporated into the liturgy. And we can't necessarily resurrect the past, but how, as philosophers and writers, we talk about and write about the earth, that's going to shape, in a lot of ways, the way people approach it, I think.
Sorry to interrupt. Today is Ember Wednesday, by the way.
See,
yeah.
I'm stepping right on top of it.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry I missed that fact. You're right. No, we'll take the question of the theologians and the philosophers. Yeah. Yes, that's our task. That's our job. We're not just simply thought managers, sort of handing on units of information safely for the next generation. We ought to be catalysts for social transformation. We should be catalysts for the dissemination of the gospel. We talk a lot about the new evangelization, but my fear is that if the new evangelization doesn't include regard for the earth and our relationship with it, it's going to fall flat. Because what ultimately is culture? Culture is the intersection of the spiritual and the material. The animals don't, strictly speaking, have culture, and frankly, the angels don't have culture. Only one creature has a culture, and that's man. And it's precisely because we straddle these worlds of the spiritual and the material. And so culture, whether it's art or architecture or agriculture or food or craftsmanship, all of these things are part of our dignity as creatures who have immortal souls, nonetheless yoked to the body. And so even something as simple, I would say, as craftsmanship, we ought to be fostering the sense of craftsmanship in the Catholic communities, precisely as part of our spiritual faith and our spiritual endeavor. That's, to me, what the new evangelization is going to mean. A re-enchantment of the natural order, the new presentation of the gospel, of course, in Jesus Christ, but a complete affirmation of the glory of the world. Remember, Christ is the second person of the Trinity, the Logos, through whom all things were made. So we cannot be indifferent to the creatures and profess Christ, because, in fact, he's the Logos that brought all this to begin with anyway. So there's lots of themes there. Obviously, I'm just trying to inspire as fast as I can, and don't mean to be flip or think that these are easy solutions. I want to try to inspire folks to think much, much more deeply about our Catholic faith in relationship to ecology.
Well, I think you've done a great job, and actually, I think of the name of a journal where actually one of your works appears, Nova et Vetera, Ever Ancient, Ever New. These concerns in really are the concerns ever since humans have decided to, not rove around, but to farm and start a culture. Same questions, but of course always a new way which we must approach them in a new, a new difficulty we have to face. But it really comes back to those questions which you said, the Word, the Logos, from the beginning of the world has always been speaking. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a fantastic show. We have to have you back because there's at least an hour more that we can talk about these things.
Well, Like I said, I'm an academic. I can go on for days.
Well, so if people want to read more, or if they want to dive more deeply into this, do you mind directing folks where they can go look more deeply into these ideas?
Well, I would take a look at the Joyful Mystery Field Notes toward a Green Thomism. I'm certain it's up on Amazon. I know Emmaus has it available. You can also purchase it through Catholic Rural Life. If you go to CatholicRuralLife.org, a portion of that sale goes to Catholic Rural Life, so I'd appreciate it if you give some thought to that. But that would be, in my mind, the beginning point. And then, frankly, if you can just go on Google and look up my name and type in Green Thomism, about 25 different sites will pop up, and people can enter the conversation through lots of venues. Do I have time for maybe one 30-second comment?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Let me just say, frankly, what's so important to me, at the heart of my project, I'm just trying to foster a deeper encounter with the person of Jesus Christ. We mentioned him in the end. Christ is the second person of the Trinity. Of course he's Redeemer, and thank God for that, but he's also Logos. So when you and I step out into the starry heavens, there's an opportunity to reconnect with the person of Christ. This is just, in my mind, a spirituality for dummies. It requires no special techniques. It requires no batteries. It's all locally sourced. What you do is you walk out into the created universe, you contemplate its beauty just for a moment, and from there enter into a prayerful relationship with the person of Jesus. The whole point of this project, the whole point of redirecting our attention to ecology, is to facilitate in the believer, and frankly, to facilitate in the one who's just searching, a deeper and more intimate relationship with God and the person of Jesus. That's the project.
Well, amen. Dr. Christopher Thompson, we couldn't end it better. Your words are the best way to end it. Thank you so much for coming on the show. We'll be calling you again to get you back on. Thank you for coming on The Uncommon Good.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Well, Bud, we usually kind of wrap up the show, but I think he wrapped it up better than we could. So for Bud Marr, this is Bo Bonner. May Jesus Christ, Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, in our families, in our city, state, our nation, and the entire world. This is The Uncommon Good. May God bless you, and may the rest of your week be, like he said, a sort of catechism that nature allows you to see Jesus Christ, the Logos, that he loves you and that he's ordered this world so well. Blessings, and we'll see you next Wednesday.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard Wednesdays at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. on Iowa Catholic Radio and on the official Iowa Catholic Radio app.